I would love for you to share your stories, the stories of your kids, the stories of founding the Little Lobbyists, a little bit about what you did on Capitol Hill, and then what it was like that night and what it means going forward. So that is an ambitious agenda, but I think we can get through it. Maybe just start by telling a bit about the stories that you told senators as you were going around the Senate. Maybe you could kick us off, Elena.
Okay, sure. We started just by sharing our stories. So we brought our kids. I brought my daughter Ziamara on every single trip, and I would walk in. I said, "My name's Elena. This is my daughter Ziamara. She's 3 years old. At that point, she was almost 3, and just talk a little bit about her and say that we wanted to speak with a staffer and sort of share our stories of all the kids."
And what was the story that you would share?
I would say that, Ziamara is medically complex. And what that means is that she has a number of medical issues. She has, issues affecting her airway, her lungs, her heart, her kidneys. She depends on a tracheostomy to breathe. She depends on a ventilator to give her additional respiratory support. She depends on a feeding tube to get all her nutrition. And she had spent the first 5 months of her life in the ICU. But despite that she's also a typical 3-year-old in many ways, right? She likes Sesame Street, and she loves her big brother, and she loves to go to the playground, and she likes to do all of these things that 3-year-olds do. And she just happens to have a longer medical history than most.
So I should fill in a little background for listeners. I'll just say from my perspective, about 6 weeks ago, I think, I looked on Twitter and I saw a photo of these kids and their parents on Capitol Hill, and it said, these are the Little Lobbyists, at Little Lobbyists on Twitter. It was a group of parents like you guys who have...
It was the two of us.
It was the two of us.
It started off with the two of us, yes.
Yeah. And you became just this extraordinary force in the healthcare debate for senators and staffers who were trying to look away from what this would do, what their healthcare repeal bill would do to human beings. You were over and over and over going around on Capitol Hill telling the stories of your kids and your families and what their healthcare bill would do to you, and making it extremely vivid and real with your kids. Kids that it is not easy to spend the day walking around Senate offices. I've, my wife is a Senate healthcare staffer, and she burst into tears one day telling me about meetings that she'd had with someone on your team, and I think that was a common thing. It changed the tenor of the debate for folks in Congress, thanks to your efforts. And that's why I'm so excited to have you here. Michelle, maybe you could just start off by sharing a bit of your story, and then I want the story of how Little Lobbyists started.
Yeah, I think the entire goal we had was we wanted people to understand that these are real kids. These are not some abstract set of figures. They're real kids. So my son Timmy is 6.5. He just finished up kindergarten. Like Elena's daughter, he also breathes through a trach. He spent 6 months in the NICU before we finally brought him home. Last week was his 44th time under anesthesia. Wow. So he's been through a lot in his 6.5 years. He was born just after the initial provisions of the Affordable Care Act kicked in, and with that came the removal of the ban on lifetime maximums. And when we looked back and dug through the bills, he would have hit what would have been his lifetime maximum when he was about 2.5 months old, right around Christmas, his first year. And that's a story that we've been trying to tell. I think a lot of people have forgotten what it was like when lifetime maximums were in place. He would have hit it right around Christmas, his very first year. So Merry Christmas, right? You're out of health insurance. But he still has health insurance. We get all of our insurance through my employer. And he, like Ziamara, he's a typical kid in so many ways. And people often look at kids that have extra medical histories, and they see that first. They don't see the fact that he's a kid that fights with his sister and loves robots and Legos and does all those typical kid things. And I think that's what we were trying to do, is we were trying to put faces on this. So we also told more than just the stories of our kids. We collected stories from families around the country, and we took those with us to the respective Senate offices that they went with. So we've collected stories, I think, now from 215 families around the country.
Wow.
From 45 different states at this point. And all of those we have taken to the Senate offices that are associated, wherever that kid is from, we've taken that to their Senate office. And we've used that as our calling card. Here we have stories. We walked into Senator Hatch's office and we said, we have stories from 16 families in Utah. We'd like to talk to somebody. And so that was our way of being able to open the conversation.
so great. And that speaks, for folks listening, it is just crucial to remember that your power comes from the fact that you're a constituent. And what you guys were able to do with Little Lobbyists was made possible by the fact you were bringing constituent stories to the relevant offices, which is, I know there's a temptation to call every senator who you want to affect, but they really don't care if you're not their boss. Their constituents are their boss. Now, how did you guys meet, and how did you decide to do this?
We met about 2 years ago at a Trake family barbecue. So
most people don't know what a Trake family is.
We didn't before either. So one of our local friends, kids with tracheostomies, we found each other online on a Facebook support group, and one of the local families decided to have a barbecue, get everyone together. And I think it was your birthday?
It was my birthday.
Yes. So we met then, and we've been in touch very regularly ever since. Our kids have become friends. Our families have become friends. So we've been in touch for about
And we've used this to try and this group of families has also tried to tackle other things. So we had some friends, other Trake family friends in Louisiana that were having trouble getting medical supplies with the flooding last year. And we got together and got contributions of medical supplies and got a U-Haul and took that down.
Drove it down.
What is a tracheostomy, and how do you care for a kid with a tracheostomy?
It's a breathing tube, basically. So it's a breathing tube that goes in your neck that goes straight down into your airway, and so you bypass. You don't breathe through your nose or mouth. You breathe through your neck, essentially, instead.
So most people know it from those scary PSA about lung cancer, but a lot of the kids have them. To give them support to breathe, and like Michelle said, that's how they breathe.
And is it complicated to maintain a trach? Is it just something that's there? What does it mean?
Initially it is. It's tough initially. It's a steep learning curve. There's a lot to do, and I think one of the things our kids, you have to have eyes on them. Right. Things can happen if something happens to block that trach. If they're coughing up mucus and it fills the trach tube, then it could be a crisis immediately. So our kids my son goes with a nurse to school, for example, because you have to have someone that's medically trained that's around. So it's a steep learning curve initially. I think it's once you sort of know what you're doing, it's not as tough.
Right. I'd say it's 24/7.
Yeah.
It's a life-threatening issue because if the trach comes out or something happens,
It's one of those where we've been told, if you call 911, 911's not going to get there soon enough.
Right.
So you have to make sure that you're on it.
Right.
Wow.
But that being said, it keeps these kids alive. You know, they're walking around, they're doing all sorts of things that typical kids are doing because of the trach.
Yeah.
And that's managed at home. So
that's the kind of thing that this repeal would have threatened, like the ability to get that nursing care.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Medicaid pays for a lot of nursing care that insurance doesn't. And so that's been huge for a lot of our families.